We go. Oh, it's my favorite sound from Zoom.
Mm,
So thanks for joining us tonight, Linda.
my
As I
pleasure.
was just saying, you were just on Lindsay Hayhurst's podcast, um, another Canadian researcher working at a university just north of the one that I work out of. And I'm really excited to talk about your book tonight. So just going to do a quick introduction. So Linda, she's a coach, although she may qualify that as a former cross country and track coach. But in my mind, sorry, you're always a coach. Especially with the book you wrote, you are coaching the whole world to be better.
Yes, indeed. Coach to the
He's a
world.
mother, most of the well, hopefully, you're a runner. And from what I heard on revisionist history, you run a sub 250 marathon, which is outstanding. And I think Lauren Fleshman said if you put the super shoes on today, back then, it's the equivalent of the Olympic standard, which is 226.50.
Good to know. So I'm practically an Olympian.
Right? You're an Olympian. There you go. You did do the trials though, right?
No, I missed them. The qualifying time is 2:45.
Oh gosh, it changed all over. You're an
Yeah,
Olympic marathon trials qualifier in my world. So
there you
there
go.
you go.
Okay.
And I saw this online, and this we'll have to talk about another day. But you are the founding member of the New York chapter of the Positive Coaching Alliance.
Yep.
You're also a freelance journalist, and you've been writing about kids' sport for a while. I actually bought an Atlantic membership because of your writing, so
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
I've
Thank
also
you.
gone down a rabbit hole of reading on there, which has been fun, but taken away from work. And why we're here tonight, we're here to talk about your book, Take Back the Game, Why Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sport and Why It Matters. Now, before we dive into your book, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Well, it's funny after reading your little overview, I thought, well, that about wraps it up. That's who I am. As you said, I'm a mother. I have 3 kids. They're all in their 20s. 2 of them are runners, I should add. And for anyone who's listening who's a runner, I'm sure they can appreciate this. I love to travel. And one thing I enjoy about it, more so when I was able to run a lot, but I always enjoyed seeing new places in a non-touristy way. Because I think you see so much of a new place when you're running. So that's the sum total of me right there.
I mean, it's a lot. The running in places to see it in a different way, that is, you and I are kindred spirits. I totally agree.
I mean, there's always that fear of getting lost, and especially if you're running in a city, it's tricky because if you're at least okay. When I was doing this more often before the smartwatch era, it wasn't as easy. It would be like, oh, you have to have a little map with you, but I suppose it's a little easier now.
So I always memorized whatever was like the local transit station because I could always get
Mm.
on the transit system, right? I'd always pack, like I often did it in Europe, like you had euros in your pocket, which would like jingle jangle. But then you could always get on like whatever transit system there was, and like I knew how to get back to where I was staying based on the transit system landmarks. So that
Yeah,
was and I only had to do it once. Where I was like, I don't know how long I'd been running. Like it was like before the GPS watches. Like
yeah.
I've been out here for a while. I don't really know. I'm just gonna get on the transit system. I was like, oh, I am nowhere near where I started.
Yeah, you have to be a little brave.
You had to be a little brave. But back then they also had city maps, right? Like in like
Yes,
right, like the big city map, and like you are here. And so again, knowing that transit stop and that major intersection, I could like navigate myself and be like, oh, I have to go this way.
yes, yes.
Oh, yeah, that was before that. So I mean, this opens up the questions, right? Like the warm-up questions that I have. I'm not going to ask you about your favorite place to run in your hometown. I'm going to ask you, where in the world is your favorite place to run?
Oh, well, I'm so glad because I was gonna, yes, I have a good answer for that, and it is Hoedspruit, South Africa.
Oh, wow. Tell us
Well,
more.
there, and this was just a year ago. It's funny because this is something only runners can really appreciate. I mean, you can tell other people, but to be a runner, and I was running in a wild animal estate.
Wow.
And people in South
Wow.
Africa live in these wild animal estates. And I ran with my son who was studying there, and it was just the coolest thing because, it's like, oh, look, there's some zebra. Oh, watch out, there's a giraffe up ahead. And it just was incredibly cool. And, you know, as we were running by, my son had run there before. He said, oh, Mom, look over there. That's a hyena den. I'm like, oh, great. You
Oh my
know,
God, terrifying.
yeah. So it was just very eye-opening. But then, you know, I told the woman at the little lodge we were staying at, and she said, yeah, I have to be careful. I mean, there's sometimes I come home and there are lions in my driveway. So I felt like, okay, get over yourself. There's some zebra, you know, they probably treat them like squirrels there. So that was
Probably.
cool.
Yeah. Although I'm looking at the picture of your dog in the background, and like I'm thinking of a squirrel and like my dog chasing a zebra. And I don't think it would end the same way as a dog chasing a squirrel, chasing the zebra.
Indeed.
But now I gotta ask this question. When you were at Oxford, did you get a chance to meet or run with Roger Bannister?
I did not, but he was at a race or two because there were a lot of, you know, sort of big, sort of celebratory things. But the most interesting thing about running there, we did all our both the cross country and the athletics team. It's athletics in England, not track and field. It's a very low key and no frills. So what it was very cool to run on that track. And then, you know, when you're running, I was like, wow, this is historic, an historic track. And but it was just very utilitarian. And you know, it's like demystified. It was just, this is very cool, but it was nothing like the fancy tracks and facilities we have here. That was a while ago. Maybe it has since been spruced up. But at the time, it was just like a regular old track off the road.
Still is. So my aunt and uncle actually live around the corner from the track.
Is that right? That's
My
cool.
uncle's father's roommate was Roger Bannister.
Wow, that's so cool.
So the Iffley Road track has been updated, but it is just a track off the side of the road.
Yeah.
I've done many workouts there. I've raced there once, which was a little bit more fanfare than just like, but you're right. Like you literally like, you can be out for a jog, you can be anybody, and everybody goes and uses the track.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, very different. And then, so the difference though between Canada and the US is we actually just don't have any tracks. So like, there's no like track you can just go to. Like, I think probably across Canada, we have probably like 20 to 25 tracks. Like there's just,
really,
it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And actually the Pan Am Games track that they built for Toronto, they tore it down for a university football field. And football is not big here. We're all bad at, like, Canadian football is not American football. I mean, football is like, we don't have to go there really, but it's just like, really, you had to take the track. The track.
Oh, wow. I didn't. So they don't run track and field here? I mean, there where you are?
They do, but you often train on cinder or asphalt tracks.
Okay.
The kids do. There's very few facilities that you can get access to, and they are unfortunately behind like big fences. And
I see. Oh, there's not easy access. Oh, that's so interesting.
I mean, I think it's our weather. Like, I don't think tracks do very well in the like extreme weather. So, okay, I get it, but I think technology's come around enough that like we can figure this out.
Yeah, you would think.
You would think. So, on the topic of the track, what was your favorite workout or your favorite workout to give to athletes?
Well, I also love this question because it made me think about back in my old training days. One I used to love was, I mean, the standard repeat 400s, you know, with a minute rest in between. I just love that. And my favorite workout to give, not so much to my team, but to my son, who's now marathon training. And what I used to do a lot is this is a great way to do 10 miles, which is too easy, too hard, too easy, too hard, too easy. Because it's just a great workout, because when you're in the rest phase, you're like you don't want the time to go, you know, go quickly. You want it to get rested. And then so that you're not like hurrying up for it to be over. You want it to take its time. But then when you're doing the 2, you want it to be over, but it will be over fairly quickly because you're doing it as, you know, it's fast and hard. So it's just a very easy, fast way to do a good, hard 10-mile workout.
Oh, what a great work. And like no frills, no fuss, no
Yes,
nothing. Just
you can do it
go.
anywhere. Yeah, if you want, if you need to work on your hills, you think about, okay, well, where can I do my 2 miles, my 2 sets of 2 miles hard in a hilly part? That's a good
Yeah,
one.
that's a great one. Definitely gonna keep that for the next marathon build. Oh, maybe I can sneak it in. And I might sneak it in before the 23rd. Um, so what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? And in the spirit of Brene Brown, who is my academic crush, what is the shittiest piece of
Oh,
advice you've ever been
okay,
given?
let's see. My best piece of advice was given to me with regard to running. I'll limit it to that.
Okay.
Was it was about a week before my marathon, and I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials, which, as I said, was 2:45. And I was close. I'd done a 10 miler recently, but it was going to be a stretch. And I'd had a good 10 miler. And I went for a run with my friend and Oxford teammate, Richard Naruker, who was a Olympian himself. He'd been finished fifth in the Olympic marathon in Atlanta. He's from England. You don't know, he's not a household name, he's not a medal winner. And anyway, it was many years ago. But at the time, I think it was before he'd run the Olympics. But he and I were friends, and we went for a little run together a few days before my marathon. And I told him about my quandary, I'm close, but it's going to be really hard and a real stretch. And he said, his advice was, why don't you just back off and don't make it a miserable experience? Like, run the race that you're capable of without making it something that's you're going to suffer and die and probably not reach the goal.
Right.
So it was like a reality check, like, yes, you can try to go out at 2:45 pace. And, if the stars are aligned and there's some kind of miracle, you might make it. But if you go out and you run a race that feels hard, but not impossible, you will have a good experience. And that's what is really important, because you can have an absolutely a brutal experience when you're racing, trying to race above your station, particularly with the marathon.
Yes.
I took that advice, and then I sort of like followed the trajectory of my 10-mile time. And I had it was a great marathon for me, and I did not hit the qualifying time, but it was a good experience, and I ran a really good race. And I'm so happy that I did that and I took his advice.
Well, and I can just see the like satisfaction and the contentment and the joy that you got from it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that it in your life gets to remain this positive experience.
Yes.
Wow, what a great piece of advice.
Well, and you could argue that it's like, well, the argument is lower your expectations, but it's to some extent it's about the need to be realistic, and that also, it doesn't matter to anybody else
Right.
if I ran a 2:49 or a 2:45. And,
Right.
At the time you can get sort of so caught up in the, oh my God, I'm running, is it 6:18 pace or is it 6:24 pace? And can I make up that? And, it all kind of collapses into nothing after a few years. I wasn't going to make the Olympic team. That was, I had no delusions about that. So it was really great advice, and I'm so glad, because it was a wonderful experience and it was a great time. It's a time I'm very proud of. And if I had an awful one, I never would have gone back. So that was my great advice. Shitty advice was actually from a father of a girl I coached, who was offering his advice to me about what we should be doing with my girls' cross country team, high school level. And he said that it's crazy that I wasn't having the girls run over the summer as much as the high school boys were. His daughter at the time was about 13. There's no reason why girls and boys shouldn't be running 50 miles a week. And if to suggest otherwise is just sexist. It's inputs and outputs. They can do it too. And I, needless to say, did not listen to that.
What sex-based differences in sport, and
Exactly.
like generally speaking, that is like the key time that young women start to become young women, and their
Yes.
bodies more than anything just need to be their bodies and not go through that. I
Yeah.
was at the other end of the standard deviation of like, I was like 17 when I went through that. So, but I didn't run 50 miles in the summer because I was water skiing and playing tennis and playing tag and
Well, and that's how you preserve your, you preserve your body. So now you can run so much because when you're an adult woman, you can handle that kind of mileage. But when you're a
I have to be an
teenage,
adult? What? Linda, that wasn't part of the deal today.
well, I mean, that is the whole point of Lauren Fleshman's book, that, the female body isn't the same as the male body, and we need to be coached based on those differences. And to just slap the male version onto women and say it's inputs and outputs just ignores the reality of the biological differences, particularly after puberty.
I'm fascinated. Like, this is a totally tangential comment, but I'm fascinated with how we train women in the marathon. And I really think the science would be different about how you train men and women in the marathon to get them to have their best day on marathon day. So I'm kind of figuring out how I can like build that into my research to pay somebody to like data mine. And then like, anyways, I'm going to look into this. I will come back in here and be like, okay, I have an answer. So yes, that is a terrible piece of it. And I did this gender equity thing today about talking to young men and boys about women in sport. And it's this idea of treating us the same all the time, and this toxic masculinity, which is just so dangerous in sport, particularly at that vulnerable age, kind of between 13 and 15 for young women, right? Like, it's, come on, men, do better.
Yeah. Well, it would help if we had more women coaches too.
Oh my God, agreed. This is also part of the project that I'm about to get into, but like, that's, again, we'll come back in a year when I got a little bit more data and a little bit more information and research. But now, I think this might be my favorite and most important question. What is your favorite post-race meal or post-race meal? Sorry. Post-race or post-workout?
Okay, well, I would say it's a fluffernutter.
We live in Canada. We have no idea what
you don't know what a fluffernutter is? Okay, no so idea. A fluffernutter, it's sort of, it's way too juvenile as something.
No, this sounds like something I would love. Keep going.
It's like either a cosmopolitan, which is for grown-ups, or a fluffernutter, which is basically peanut butter and marshmallow cream on it has to be junky bread. I mean, I'm not going to be one of those arguing for like yogurt and fruit, even though I know it's the right thing. Give me a fluffernutter.
Favorite, not best for you. Yes. I said favorite, like
a fluffernutter. Maybe a fluffernutter and a cosmopolitan. That would be a nice combination.
I like it. I'm definitely coming to run with you to have a fluffernutter. And if I have the cosmopolitan, I will be giggling out of control because I sniff alcohol and I'm like, I think I'm drunk. So let's dive into your book. So last week I had the opportunity to sit in on the conversation with the LF, Lauren Fleshman, Linda Flanagan. I had a good laugh by myself at home listening to that. We're not going to play the Martian game. We're not going to pretend that a Martian has flown in and we're going to undo these things and we're going to ban certain things. Mostly because I want to see the world build back better. So let's work within the systems that we have. So one of the things I'm super curious about, and I really want to thank CBC Scott Russell for kind of like teasing this question out of me, but how do we build back inclusive, barrier-free sport for development in schools through the elementary to high school continuum?
Well, I think that it starts with offering, and I can't speak for Canada, I'm assuming that they're roughly the same models, that we need to do a better job with recess, for one thing. Here in the States, there's been a movement at various times whenever people freak out about test scores that, we need to make, elementary school more academic. So let's get rid of recess. So I think a big part of getting kids participating, getting kids moving and feeling good about their bodies, or at least feeling comfortable in them, is to preserve or reinstate recess. I mean, it's so obvious. There's so much research about the cognitive and emotional benefits that go with movement, clearing your head. I mean, it's well documented, and it's crazy to me that we would even think about eliminating recess. We need to reinstate that, do a better job of that, of making it like the default mode, maybe twice a day. I mean, I just was talking to somebody else about this today, that in Finland, they give kids recess every 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just have this idea that it's dispensable, no, expendable. That's the word. We could do away with it.
Yeah.
Also, I think we need to do a better job with, the technical name is physical education, but we all know it as gym here in the States. And no matter what the PE movement is trying to rebrand, it's always going to be gym. But I think if we could do at the elementary school level and the middle school, really at all the levels in school, to try to eliminate the humiliating aspects of gym for people. I was just talking to a man today about it, who we were talking about my book and his experience in sports. And he said he was one of those kids who hated gym. He hated it. He skipped it. He had to go to summer school for gym.
What?
And because he just blew it off all the time. And he said he hated it. It was humiliating. He'd get tossed out into right field. And then I think, especially if you're a male, there's all the expectation that you should be a good athlete, or you should at least care about it. And if you're not, it's even worse for men and boys, I think, than for girls and women. So I would really like to see PE be reformed in such a way that it does not revolve around humiliations and changing clothes and all of that stuff that is just so fraught for young people, understandably.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the big ones, I think. Also at the elementary school level, this is outside of school, but if we could expand the availability of recreation programs that are, community-based, that are low cost, easy to get to, to move away from the idea that the only way to play sports is to go travel somewhere. And now where I live, my family we were very lucky. My kids had all kinds of options, cheap Y programs, rec center programs. And that's how you get a lot of kids to play. And I think I would love to see a recommitment to that on the part of communities funding those things so that everyone can play. That's one big way to improve access. And participation beyond like age 11 or 12, because at least here in the States, so many kids quit because it's like it's up or out. You're either doing travel or you're done. And I think the big reforms, I think, have to be done at the high school level, because it's there where there's a cutoff, a drop off between those who can play the varsity sports and those who can't. So again, it's up or out. Either you can play them or you can't. And if you can't, what do you do? And there are some schools here in the States where they have developed robust intramural and club sports programs, and where they're using the schools. Many schools have a lot of fields. They go unused during the day. The gym is sporadically available. That if we can be creative, like there's one particular athletic director, Tuscarora High School in Maryland, they are committed to getting more kids to participate who don't want to play varsity sports. They've got no interest in wearing a suit to school and traveling, to a distant school over the weekend, or like in track and field, spending 8 hours in a track. But if you can just provide this middle ground kind of opportunity. So during the day, this particular school, they have intramural programs during the school day. It's not after or before, it's right in the middle, because they're very creative about making that space available. So, and club teams also, school-based club teams. I don't mean private club teams. I mean, hey, everyone, let's meet at the park after school. This teacher's going to supervise. I think that's the way to kind of improve access, is to expand the number of opportunities, low-cost opportunities, and particularly at the school level where all kids have to go. So that's how you reach them.
So when and if you want the research, to your first point about bringing back more playtime, one of the things I did towards the end of my PhD was write a chapter in a math book about that very thing. So we were tasked with how would you improve the mathematics classroom for kids?
Huh.
And I said, let them play more, right? So I looked at the way that I compared it to how we teach music, how we teach how we teach music and how we teach reading. And then I
Mhm.
compared it to the number of minutes of physical activity that kids need a day. And I went through the history of the elimination of more and more recess and gym time. And I said, if you really
Mhm.
want kids to be better at math, the first thing you need to do is make sure that they get their 180 minutes a day, not a week. So kids under the age of 12 need 180 minutes of exercise a day. Sasha Golish is 41. I need 180 minutes of exercise a day if I am going to be remotely good at anything that I do. So I have so much empathy for those kids. But I finally found a job, and so I used to do finger math. Like I literally used to do mathematics while running. But I have this job, and I used to do this with my math homework and other things where I'm like, I need to go for a run. I just need to go think. And it's that ability to like literally let your mind let go of what's going on so
Yes,
that the pieces can come together. But
right.
for some reason, and maybe, and I don't, my hypothesis is the people that are making these policies don't know how to do that. And so they can't actually feel the benefit of being a better version of themselves and thinking through something more clearly, like a mathematics problem, by actually doing a physical activity. So
Mhm.
if you ever need the research to support that claim,
Okay,
I have it
that's
for
good
you.
to know.
Happy to send it to you.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you bring up intramurals. So I said I live under a rock. So I went to a high school that had intramurals at lunch. And so
Mm.
naturally, I just assumed that obviously every other school would have intramurals at lunch, right? And we had these teams, like you talk about club teams, right? I remember ringette. So, we didn't have a hockey arena at school, but we had these gyms. And so you could play gym ringette. And it was like the most popular sport. So it took the longest to get through based on like the number of lunchtimes that people have. Um, and we had all these teams competing against each other. So like I didn't know until like where I've gotten to now that most people don't have intramurals, right? You talk about the gyms being available, but then layer onto that, all the equipment is available.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
not worried about trying to like set volleyball nets up somewhere. Like it's quickly easy to
Yes.
do
Yeah.
at lunch and all the volleyballs are right there. The basketball nets can like come down. There
Yeah.
was a running club where, they would go run. We were two high schools joined together. So Canada. So we had a French one and an English one. And
Yeah.
so we had big fields. And so you could, people could go out and run. And it wasn't about how fast are you running today.
Yeah. Yeah.
People walked or people did whatever. So, I think that intramurals and that inviting way for people to come out is really important. And then I talked to Bruce Kidd. I don't know if I actually, there's a question here about me wanting to buy you and Bruce Kidd dinner and just sit there and listen.
We'd love to.
But I've just lost my train of thought about what Bruce Kidd said.
About
Talked
intramurals.
about talked about the barrier to physical activity and physical education and gym, where again, kind of blinded by my own bias, how challenging gym would be for somebody who's not naturally gifted as an athlete and how
Hmm.
uncomfortable that would be. So that if you
Yes.
then took those people and you grouped them together where they're at their same ability, it's that sense of belonging and less of comparison. And
Hmm.
I was like, wow, what a beautiful way to phrase it. Because, we're going to call it gym here, because that's obviously what it's called. You were graded upon how good you were at it,
Yeah.
not about
Which is
your
crazy.
it's crazy. It's crazy, right?
It's
It
like
should be
grading you
about
in your art ability, like if you're painting and you have natural ability to draw, like that is a particular talent you have. You shouldn't be graded better than a kid who doesn't have that talent.
did you participate? Are you having fun? Can I see that you're learning something about yourself through this? Right?
Hmm.
Like that's what phys ed is about. Like you're learning about yourself. You're like, my limbs don't go this way. I'm
Yeah.
falling down. Like, and that's okay. But we've made it about a scorecard,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
just seems so ridiculous. Anyways, so yes, we need to blow up the gym and recess
Yes.
world. And then, like one of the things I reflect back. So recess is great, but I grew up in an era where like the girls would go outside and stand there.
Yeah.
The boys would
Mhm.
go and play. And so then
Yeah.
how do you bring back play to recess where I think that's kind of that element of play is gone? And then how
Hmm.
do you get the girls to play more and not just stand there?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
cold. Like we're
there's an interesting fact I read recently about injury rates between girls and boys, and girls tend to get injured more than boys.
Mm-hmm.
And the researcher was speculating or theorizing that this is the case because girls play less in fewer unstructured settings than boys. So boys, they might play the same number of hours, which is a lot. Here in the States, it's 16.6 hours a week on average. That's between kids between the ages of 5 and 18. Okay.
Wow.
But boys do most of that, or a good chunk of that is organized, but there's a lot of it that's also unstructured. It's meeting at the playground or at the park and shooting hoops with your friends. It's more natural, whereas with girls, it tends to always be organized. And that is more conducive to injuries, the organized sports, the organized competitions. So it does speak to that sort of reluctance on the part of girls to just go out and play. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't know what you do about that.
Well, and then I think you talked about this in your book. I know you've talked about it on other podcasts that you've done about stranger danger, right? So that free form play after school. So I grew up in the mini United Nations. So there was, my sister and I are Jewish, and the neighbors next door were Iranian, right? Neighbors, let's go out and play tag. Let's go out and ride bikes. Let's go out and do this, right? Like, I was talking about this with my mom the other day, like it was hard to get us to come in for dinner. And that sense of play is gone.
Yeah.
Which is so unfortunate. And, I think it's worse in the States, but I think that mentality is bleeding very much into Canada, particularly into the bigger cities. And in particular, post-pandemic, when there seems to be an imbalance of mental health challenges and parents, in a way, being understandably afraid about letting their kids just go out. So I'm gonna have to find that research on. I'm very curious about it.
About the structured versus unstructured. Yeah. It's Dr. Neeraj Jayanthi at the Emory. He's the head of sports medicine research at Emory University. He's written about this quite a bit, or talked about it a lot too.
Okay, I'm gonna have to dig into that. So on the topic of women in sport and girls in sport, this is where I wanted to buy you and Bruce dinner. Was talking about toxicity in sport. Tell us what you learned, in writing your book about girls and toxicity in sport.
Well, first I would say it applies to both genders. There's perhaps a different kind. I mean, it applies to both genders in that both girls and boys are targeted. That may be too strong a word, but they're certainly victims of emotional abuse, sometimes physical abuse. I think boys maybe just are more apt to write it off and just think, oh, that's just the nature of sport, or it's boys will be boys. But it's very true for both genders.
Okay.
I think what's really important for parents to know, and this is something that I found so surprising and that is counterintuitive, which is that the better the athlete, the more elite the athlete, the higher up they ascend the ranks of their sport, the more likely they are to be subject to abuse. And it's counterintuitive because you think, how can these, like the National Women's Soccer League in the US, how can these confident, capable, tough women put up with some asshole coach, being lewd and rude and terrible? And it's because they care so much about, the better you are, the more devoted you are, the more committed, the more you're sacrificing for your sport, the more you're going to put up with unacceptable behavior by a coach. And this is true for boys and girls. And I think that's an important bit of information that parents should know, that just because your kid's on the A team of the elite travel squad doesn't mean that they're immune from this kind of mistreatment. And often the better the reputation of the coach, and I hate to say this, having been a coach, and I don't want to point fingers unfairly at coaches who are just doing the best they can, but oftentimes it is the coach who has the best reputation, who's got the winning team, that's sort of untouchable, and they can get away with things. And and it's very, very hard for kids and parents. When parents want to step up and address it, it's really hard to get the backing of other people on the team or other. It's just kind of, it's shocking to me, but it's true that other parents want to, let's not rock the boat. He's gonna get you into a good college or get you to the next level. That's more important. And I really,
Right.
I feel strongly that is wrong and misguided.
I mean, it's a pretty loaded question to ask you, but how do you think we can go about fixing that?
Well, I think it starts in part at because we tolerate lower level, I don't, and abuse is too strong a word, but lower level kind of bad behavior on the part of coaches, even when kids are very young.
Okay.
There's sort of, I think those coaches, sports have this weird carve out, in my opinion, for like behavior that would be unacceptable in any other sphere. We sort of carve it out for sports. Oh, well, so a coach of 6 and 7-year-olds can yell and shriek at them and yank them off the court when they miss a shot or make a mistake, or kind of like low grade humiliation, not always low grade. And I think this,
right.
because we have this carve out for sports of accepting, and it's like, that's just sports. It just perpetuates this. It just gets worse and worse as they get older. And then it's like, well, how do we fix this? So I think it's got to start when they're young, when the kids are young, and just having a zero tolerance policy for cruelty. I mean, that's like,
right.
how hard is that? It's just crazy that you have to say that. But of course, that's the way it is in the classroom. And
right.
I can't think of any other sphere where it's like okay to be, cruel, but it is sort of like brushed aside in sports. And I think to get to it at the level of the National Women's Soccer League, you got to start when everyone's young and just, kind of abolish that distinction between sports and the rest of life where you're expected to be civil and decent. And I mean, I think education is a part of it. That's kind of the fallback answer for everything. Oh, people need to be better educated about this and that. And I do think that it most likely can't hurt, but I've gotten a little cynical about the power of education. Because, what do you need to change your mind? People don't change their minds generally.
No.
Confronted with facts, they, don't change their minds. But I do think that more coaches understood that yelling and screaming and fear-based coaching is not conducive to good performance. That it is just, and I've always said coaches yell and scream and get angry because they can. They
right.
can because no one says they can't. Sure, teachers would like to yell and scream sometimes too and send out that kid that can't spell necessary correctly, like to send him out to run, a mile in 6 minutes, but it's not acceptable. We don't accept it. I think if we could adopt that mindset, try to percolate that thinking about sports, that teaching a sport is no different from teaching algebra or, chemistry. You're trying to teach somebody something. It's in the physical realm. That doesn't mean you teach through fear. It's not conducive to progress. You may get short-term results, but I don't think that should be the goal of coaching or sports. It shouldn't be to like just win the season. It's in order to develop into athletes, in order to encourage young people to be active their whole lives, not just have one good season.
Right. It's funny. Oh my gosh. Okay, so then that's the parallel to math, right? So like, we don't want people to just drop math when they like finish grade 11, right? You want them to carry that skill forward. And I think about the parallel to education, and I hope not. I mean, I had some sort of abusive teachers in the sense, and interestingly enough, always male math teachers.
Oh, that is interesting. Did
Would
they
scream
double
and
as
yell.
football coaches? Oh no, you don't have a lot of football.
We don't really have football here.
Yeah.
No. They actually weren't coaches. They didn't believe in sport, which is like true mathematician. And it's like, I'm a mathematician. Well, I'm not really, but I like math. and I like sport, but this fear-based, and I think there is a parallel here to math. There's this like fear-based teaching, right?
Yes.
That we're going to scream and yell at you until you get it right. We know that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
If you want thriving environments, right? You can't leave people in crisis or in this like survival floundering mode, right? You need to motivate them and treat them as individuals. And this fear-based, well, if you can't do this, you're stupid on the math side, or you can't
Hmm.
do this, you're not an athlete. Like that doesn't work, right? And
Yeah.
so, and then on the elite side, which always, I've only had one terrible coach, and I basically like walked out the door, because I want to be the best version of myself. And sort of knowing what I know, if we want to, the American women's soccer team, if we want them to be the best team in the world, and they are, but if we want them to be like unbelievably dominant, we need them to thrive. And to do that, we need to put them in an environment that's not fear based, because we know that then people can't perform to their potential. So, you
Yeah.
know, to me, it's this mismatch in what the coaches say they want and what they do. And so it's then, in this very day and age, I see it as like cancel culture. And I think that cancel culture is really dangerous. And I think cancel
Mhm.
culture is dangerous in a way that it stops a conversation from happening.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
today I heard call in, and I like using call up. So
Hmm.
it's great that you're coaching the US. I want to call the Canadian women's soccer team, but I'm going to, to be better. It's great that you're coaching the US women's soccer team. They are an incredibly dominant team. You know that they can be even better.
Hmm.
Let me show you how.
Yeah.
And so I think in this day and age with cancel culture in particular, I think people generally feel on edge and threatened, which is
Hmm.
really too bad. Although, like, maybe we do need to burn Twitter down for that reason. Um, but how we can call people in and call people up. And I think that's the coaching. Like, you know, outside of our lifetime, teachers once a time kind of behave that way. Like, you got your hand, my mom would tell me stories about like having her hand snapped, like slapped with a ruler. Like, I am
Right.
my mother's daughter. Like, for sure she acted out in class too. Right. So like I for sure would have had my knuckles slapped. I was like out of control sometimes. And that behavior's gone. And
Yes.
we're trying to create thriving classrooms, and we're always trying to do better at that. And so there's a culture shift that needs to happen. And it's interesting hearing you say it, that culture shift is slow to happen because we are tolerating this behavior, but we
Yes.
wouldn't tolerate it in the classroom. So we need to like, to me, it's like putting design and systems thinking on. That's my engineer and me coming out right there. Like, how do we do this in a culturally appropriate way to lift everybody up for this culture shift to happen so that
Hmm.
everybody becomes the best version of their athlete self, anywhere from the entry level to the high performance?
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
I understand I'm asking like big questions that have
Hmm.
challenging answers, but it's this culture shift. And
Yes.
I think you talk about it in your book quite eloquently about like the top down shift and the bottom up shift that needs to
Hmm.
happen. And then also figuring out how to give athletes a voice to say, hey, I know what you were trying to say there, but that kind of language doesn't work with me.
Yeah. Right.
So that there's then this like three-pronged approach so that the culture shift can happen. And I wonder if that's what happened in classrooms, where someone was like, of course you can't slap my knuckles, right?
Yeah.
Like, stop yelling at me, number one. But no, of course you cannot slap my knuckles anymore.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's
Right?
what gives me hope that, it can happen in sports, I think.
Mhm.
And some of the stuff that we used to be okay with in sports is no longer okay either. There have been
Right.
some, you don't, it's only a Neanderthal coach who denies the kids water, for example.
Right.
Like we know that, okay, that's dumb and dangerous. And coaches know that that's not something you do. So there
Right.
are changes, and I'm hopeful that what we have seen happen in the classroom will migrate over into sports. And I coached at a private girls school, and I did notice that there was less kind of hostile coaching there, and I think it
Okay.
was because like hostile coaching would not have been tolerated, because like what
Right.
are you doing to these girls? Like if some you know knuckle dragging man was shrieking at them, it just wouldn't have been acceptable. It's like, and that's partly because the parents are paying a lot of money, and these girls, that wasn't, you didn't treat these girls that way, you just didn't.
Right.
And I think that there's no reason why that shouldn't apply anywhere. You
Yeah.
know, in my view, I've not ever heard, and I would love to hear some coach who thinks that, you know, the school of hard knocks or the just yell and scream, yank them when they make a mistake, humiliate them when they forget their uniform. I'd love to hear someone defend that in a way. I've never heard it defended in a way that makes any kind of sense. Like, how does this translate into better results? And, you know, I'm not at all persuaded that it does. I just think they do it because they can and they're frustrated. And, you know, so again, that's also where education comes in. But as I said, I'm a little down on the power of education.
Fair enough. But going back to your original point when I said, toxicity in girl sport versus boy sport, I think you just made a really good point about talking about, what wouldn't be tolerated in an all girl school. And it just shouldn't be tolerated in a mixed gender or a boys' school. And a little bit, I wonder if that's where the culture shift is slow to happen because, as you said earlier, it's still tolerated.
Yeah.
And, how do we shift that mindset of, well, you'd never do this at a girls' school to you'd never do this coaching.
Yes, you never do this, period. Right. And I guess I think there is this thinking that, oh, you just want to make it fun. You're just
right.
It's just about having a good time. Like, that's not what sports are. They're about building character, making you tough and strong. And it's like, there's no reason you can have high standards and high expectations without being a jerk. I think that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, it's how you go about developing those qualities in a young person or an adult. It's, like, as an adult, would you take it if your coach were yelling at you? Like, no, it's like, I'm an adult. Don't talk to me like that. Like, I want this too. I would have been the 13-year-old
standing up, by the way, being like, no, won't let. I would be the fill of piss and vinegar, be like, you can't talk to me that way. And they'd look at me like, you're 13. I'm like, yeah, and next.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That it's very unusual, it's.
And to the point that, how do we give people the courage to have the voice to not maybe say it with piss and vinegar, but so that it's the power structure, right? No matter how great of a coach and how inclusive you are, there's a little bit of power over.
Yeah.
You don't have to take advantage of power over.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. But then how do we give those athletes the voice so that when that power over starts to do this and it becomes so dangerous and threatening that they have, and so maybe it's not education to the coaches. Maybe it's about, and maybe this comes back to phys ed, gym. How do we give athletes in gym the voice to say, I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to do this. I know that you're getting frustrated with me because I can't do this, right? This social emotional learning, to have this conversation in a relatively safe space so that they can take it to whatever avenue and environment they are in life. Like, let's say it's, a kid that, doesn't really like gym and they're a talented musician. Music is another super toxic environment at times, right? But leveraging this voice for the participants to also change the culture.
Yeah. Well, in sports in particular, it's so much about obedience. There's this kind of obedience thing. And I think, if you read about Steve Magnus's stuff, I don't know if you've read his Do Hard Things, he's so good, and his tweets are so good about that in order to develop mastery, you have to have a sense of autonomy and control, and that this is coming from within. Your desire. Running is easy because it's so concrete, but you have the desire, you want to break the 5-minute mile. But to have autonomy, and I think that's where the better coaches are able to give the kids more autonomy in the decision making about how the team is run, practices. That's in my view, that's the way it ought to be. Like, this is our team. It's not me coming up announcing from on high that this is how we do it. It's, hey, girls, you've been here for 3 years, the workouts, how are you feeling today? Do you think hills, are your quads okay? Are hills going to kill you? I was thinking hills. What do you think? Having it be more democratic, I think, would go a long way towards giving athletes more voice, so that they would be comfortable. So it's not like, a violation of the hierarchy by saying, excuse me, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. But they're part of the whole process of becoming a strong team, or strong individuals in a team. It's, that's another one of those culture shifts. But I do think the better coaches are doing that already. And it's what's happening in the classroom. It's the other thing. And I don't know if it's true in Canada, but in the States, there is this movement towards less movement away from having the teacher standing at the front of the class, being the authority, and filling kids' brains with the information they need to know, but trying to get it be like a bottom up sort of, okay, let's pursue your interest. Where should you look for that? What do you think? Being kind of a midwife to their learning rather than the God to their learning.
I think in that paper I wrote, I called it the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and to that point, so the other thing I wrote in that paper was I said, I picked a soccer example, right? I picked standing in a circle and kicking a soccer ball around. And I was like, you don't want that to happen in a game, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're trying to teach, what you are trying to teach in soccer is autonomy, so that whatever play comes up, the athletes can react and they're not looking to the side for the coach. Because the second that they look to the side, the other team takes advantage. And so,
right,
to your point about autonomy, if you then want to frame it in, it's, when I frame things to students at school, like I have to frame it in, this is going to improve your grade. This is going to improve your team. But if you give the athletes the autonomy,
yes,
they're going to outperform even your expectations, because they're going to start to think and see the field of play in a different way.
Right.
But if you control it, they're going to look to you to make the move, and then it's too late.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I really wanted to ask you about parents, but like, if we go down that rabbit hole, we will be here for another 2 days.
I know.
I think leaving it at autonomy and mastery is really important. I'm going to, by the way, Steve Magnus's mom, I believe, was or is Canadian, so he's got a little tie to Canada. But layer in Brad Stolberg's when they talk about it: autonomy, mastery, and belonging. And when you have belonging, you often then have the courage to step up and say something, because you know that there's a gaggle of girls behind you that feels your energy and supports you standing up, probably for you, but probably for all of them. And so continuing to encourage belonging so that these athletes can have this autonomy and mastery and help with the change within culture.
Well, and that's what teenagers really want. And that's why teams are so powerful, because, why the sporting environment is so influential in how kids grow up and their memories of school. Because when you're a teenager, you got these raging emotions, and, it's this period of great brain development, and which, is gears them in such a way that they're all about their peers and belonging. So, that's why teams are such incredible learning environments, for better and worse, but like you say, it's autonomy, mastery, and belonging.
I mean, that's Brad and Steve, but yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you close this out. What, you want us to take away from your book?
What do I say again, Sasha?
Sorry, what's one thing that you'd want us to take away from your book?
Oh, gosh. It doesn't have to be like this. The way our system is set up doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to tolerate the way sports have devolved, so that all the joys and heartaches and growth that comes from participation, and I don't mean just for fun, I mean like hardcore participation on a competitive team, whether it's running or any other sport, that what's so important about that doesn't have to be lost, because, oh well, it is what it is. We can put our stake in the ground and stick up for preserving what makes sports so good. And, together, various people around the country, there's a lot of people like you and me and others who are really trying to fix this, and that it doesn't have to be this way. How's that?
That's beautiful, and that's perfect. Thank you.
My pleasure, Sasha. Thank you for having me. It was really nice
Oh my
talking
gosh,
to you.
we're gonna have to do this again.
When's your